Well, Nipsey Hussle,
Yes.
tragically killed.
Yes.
I interviewed him once, and the way that he was presented, at the end of his life,
Right.
was pretty much the way our interview went.
Right.
Very business-minded, very forward-thinking,
Right.
very intelligent.
Right.
I have absolutely nothing but good things to say about him.
You know what made me saddest about Nipsey Hussle?
What's that?
It's not it's not what he was, it's what he could have been.
Yeah.
I think and I said this, you can't have a tomorrow when you keep killing your todays.
Yeah.
The very things, the very answers to the questions that plague our communities, he was the answer to.
Well, you grew up in a very similar environment.
Right.
In what area?
135th and Avalon.
And what's that considered?
Compton, LA, Willowbrook. It's
Got
just
it.
that, right.
Got it. You grew up in a blood neighborhood.
Yes.
He grew up in a Crip neighborhood.
Right.
Not that big of a difference at the end of the day.
But you know that makes me the saddest is there was a time in my life where I'd have seen something like when I was very young. I would have seen something like that where another guy from another neighborhood got killed. And if he wasn't in my neighborhood, I wouldn't have felt the empathy or sympathy I did. Because we're conditioned to believe that the only thing that matters is our 6-block radius that our mother and father are struggling to pay the rent on.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed Big U, who was,
Right.
the OG from
sure.
the Rolling 60s. And, he kind of broke down the Rolling 60s A-Tray gangster beef.
Right.
More than it was a beef with the Rolling 60s and the A-Tray gangsters, it split up LA.
Yeah.
Like when the Rolling 60s and the A-Tray gangsters started fighting, it split LA in half.
I remember that. I remember. Now I was a blood, but I remember the. It seemed weird to me because there was so few bloods when I grew up that we didn't beef like that. I mean, we'd have fights and stuff, but that the '60s and the A-Tray gangsters, their mortal enemies were both Crips, and they lived right next to each other, and it always seemed weird to me.
Right, and he kind of described how, both those gangs were so big and
Right.
so affiliated with other gangs
Right.
that it kind of split LA down the middle.
Right.
Because
It did.
if you were cool with the 60s, you now had to have beef with the A-Trays.
Right.
And if you were friends with the A-Trays, now you have beef
Like
with the
the
60s.
11, the
whether you-
111 Hoovers, the
Right.
107s. It was with the rain. It was like a weird thing, and there was what makes me the saddest. There was a time in my life where I watched other black men being slaughtered, and I thought nothing of it, and that makes me sad. And it makes me sad because the 55-year-old me would have looked so would have despised the 15-year-old me. Because if you get to be this age, you get a continuum of experience. I get 40 years of experiences where I can look back. But I will say this, that I think there's an idea. Look at the way we see ourselves. Like, I never wanted to leave my neighborhood. I thought it was the best place ever. I thought that everything I ever needed or everybody I ever loved was there. And then now I've seen the world. And now I know my neighborhood is the world. So that would say to me, if a black man gets choked to death in New York because it's in my neighborhood, the 50-year-old me wouldn't have cared. The 55-year-old me does. If Trayvon Martin, the 15-year-old me wouldn't have cared. The 55-year-old me does.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have these types of situations, and I'm not talking about the Nipsey situation.
Sure.
I'm just talking about on a macro level.
Right.
Right? And, like, you have, for example, the 60s A-Tray
Right.
beef. 40 years.
Yeah, a
they've
little
been
longer than
going
that.
on.
A little longer than that.
Where you grow up and you're being told this group of people that you've never met over a situation you know nothing about, really, that's your enemy. You have to refer to those people as your enemies. That's my enemyhood. Those are my enemies over there.
It's the Hatfields and McCoys.
Yeah.
It's Palestine and Israel.
Yeah.
What I know now that I didn't before, everywhere black people and brown people live is where we were forced to live. There were places you couldn't live in Los Angeles. I remember when my mother and father wanted to buy a house, I was a little boy. There were places we could live. You could live in Inglewood.
Compton.
You could live in Compton. You can live in the inner cities.
Carson.
And you can live in Carson. That's where you could live. Everywhere we live, every hood we fight for is where they told us we had to be. They gave us the chitlins of real estate, and we fight over it. And it's insane to me.
You don't own it.
But the 15-year-old me wouldn't have known what the 55-year-old me does. The thing I loved about Nipsey is that he had a connection to the people in that area, but his connection was deeper than that. It wasn't just people in his neighborhood that came to see him. You know what? I bet you more people lined the streets of Los Angeles and watched his procession than came to see Donald Trump be inaugurated as president. More people probably looked and said goodbye to Nipsey than hello to him. Now, that's not because he represented the 60s. That's because he represented us. That's because in us is all of us.
I think what a lot of people don't understand is that Nipsey was celebrated during his death, not for his rapping, but what he did outside of rap. If you take the rap away, he would still be just as celebrated because of what he did.
Biggie and Tupac sold way more albums.
Way more.
Did they get buried at the Staples Center?
No. Although Biggie had a huge procession.
He did have a huge
in
procession.
Brooklyn, yeah.
He might have had it in Brooklyn. He didn't have it in Africa. He didn't have it in Europe. He didn't have it in South Central, in Texas, in New York. Do you know why? Because his art wasn't his thing. His humanity was. And the thing that's beautiful about that is, I think that the children that live in these inner cities that are shell-shocked with all this violence now see something that ain't just being a basketball player or a rapper or an athlete or a comedian. It's that you can be a human being and be so human that you connect with a place. There's no lyric, no joke, or no catch that could ever touch the places in our hearts that Nipsey Hussle did. And that's amazing to me. But that's aspirational for people. What if you wanted to be that? When I grew up, I wanted to be like the dude that shot Nipsey. I thought that was the greatest thing ever.
Eric Holder.
To put in work for your set. I thought that was dope.
Yeah, although I don't know whether he was really putting in.
But I'm just
work
saying,
for
if
a
you
set in that situation. But I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But to have the idea that the destruction of things was better than the building of it.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden you have a young man who died, who showed you that living your life, even though it was short, in a way of when I've never seen black men, a young black man like that in my life, celebrated for his service to people.
Yeah, man. I mean, when you talk about, aspiring to do violence, like I remember I interviewed Mr. Capone, who was affiliated with the Mexican, the Sureños, and he said as a kid, and this has always blown my mind. He said that
my dreams, like it even sounds crazy as hell, but my dreams were like I want to be doing life in prison.
As a 17-year-old kid, you dreamed
to
have life in prison.
I dreamed that.
And to be like a high-ranking member calling shots from your jail cell.
When you're a kid, I was loving violence. I was loving the streets. I was loving the power. I was gaining power because I was not just the average. I was actually out there putting in work, so I would see the power, and I was enjoying the power. But when you get to jail, you realize like it's just like at the end of the day, I'm not gonna say shit, but everyone ain't loyal. Everyone ain't really for the push.
Which is absolutely crazy. You aspire to go do life in prison. And I remember I asked a couple other people, other Mexican artists, and they're like,
when you're a youngster, that's everybody's mentality. That was mine too.
You had that same mentality.
Same mentality. That's when you're a youngster, your dream is to hit Pelican Bay and all that stuff, you feel me? But as you become older and like you have kids and shit, and you have homies that are already there, or, you know what I mean? And see what it really is, you kind of change your views in life and shit. Like,
to aspire to this is so backwards. And they realize it's backwards now when they're older and they have kids and everything else like that.
Because they have a continuum of experiences.
Right.
When you're young and all you have is this area and all you have is this set of rules and all you had is this set of circumstances, the thing about Nipsey is it's the thing that is prevalent all across these cities, all across this country, and I speak to this country in particular because this is where I live, but all across this country, is there a lot of young black and brown men, boys, who will never become men because their idea of what that look like is so small, they think getting to the next day is a victory. And it makes me sad. And it makes me sad. I cry for the 15-year-old boy I was more than I celebrate the 55-year-old man I am.